Mr. Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and gentlemen, thank you for testifying today and your service. General Carlisle, always good to see you, sir. Great career in the military. And Mr. Smith, I appreciate our opportunity to chat last night. It was very informative for me. And Mr. Schmidt, thank you for all you're doing in your kind of post Google world. Let me ask a question that there's been some press back and forth, and I think it's just given your three leaders, right? Big leaders in America in a whole host of different ways. There's been some press in the last couple of years where some concerns I've read, and I'd love you to just comment on it, on our tech industry, Silicon Valley in particular, kind of maybe not being so interested in supporting our military, supporting the Pentagon. You know, Mr. Smith, as you and I talked about, I had the opportunity to go out to Microsoft's IVAS Partnership and Development Center. I thought it was incredible seeing these young men and women who are very motivated to help our men and women in uniform. Mr. Schmidt, I'm sure you saw there's some Google press that I thought was very unfavorable where, you know, there was this idea, hey, we don't want to help the Pentagon. My view, as an American, it's a free country, you can do whatever the heck you want, but don't then be found to be helping the Chinese Communist Party. Like, that's going to be a problem. So can you three, I would love to hear just succinct statements on, from your perspective, just how important that is. We have a challenge with this very new great power competitor and the technology of our country. Working with our military is going to be indispensable. And it does concern me some when you hear, and again, they're allowed to do it. One of the great things about our country, it's free. You can just say whatever you want, but I'd love to hear from you guys on just how important it is to be doing what you're doing and what we're talking about here, because if we don't have that kind of cooperation, it's going to be tough on all of us.
Well, I would say first, I think one of the great challenges for this committee, the Congress and the country, is to keep the public united around the importance of our national security at a time when we live in a polarized political climate. And the key to that, not surprisingly, is, as always, leadership and communications. You know, the formula that we have found to be effective is to be clear that we as a company at Microsoft will provide to the United States military all the technology that we create. We will simultaneously engage to address the issues that a new generation, I think, rightly focuses on, things like the ethics of artificial intelligence. And we will honor people's choices. And when we have a project like IVAS, it's really an all-volunteer project, and we have no shortage of volunteers.
And those young men and women, I will tell you, haven't spent a day with them, were incredibly impressive, motivated, patriotic, because they knew what they were doing, which is helping the frontline troops who put their life on the line for our nation.
And I think there's one other thing where communication can be invaluable. Look, most people, you know, in the tech sector or perhaps most industries are simply not aware of the deep ethical tradition of the United States military. And when they learn about it, we actually realize that we have more to learn from the military, and it really changes the climate among especially a new generation of employees.
I appreciate you saying that, Ms. Smith. Mr. Schmidt or General?
So the only thing, I'm sorry, sir, I didn't mean to interrupt. The only thing I'd add is, you know, my experience is the American population is further and further, in many cases, removed from the military.
Yeah.
It's an all-volunteer force, which is exactly the right thing, in my opinion, and the quality of the force in the United States military. I tell everybody, if you want to be impressed with America's youth, go out to your flight lines, your ships, your tanks.
Yeah.
These 19-year-olds are just amazing.
It gives you
women
hope
and
and optimism. There's no doubt about it.
But I think it's an education. I think that, just as Mr. Smith said, I think a lot of it is not because they fundamentally, you know, don't like the military. They just don't know.
Yeah.
That we go to the lengths we go to deter and prevent vice. The last person that wants to go to war is the person getting shot at. And so the prevention and deterrence, and then when we are to follow the most ethical rules for how, if we have to engage, how we engage, and how we do everything we can to only follow the enemy combatants. So I think it's an education process, Senator Sullivan.
Mr. Schmidt, you have a view on that, and I didn't want to come down too hard, but I have ripped some Google employees in hearings like this before where maybe it was bad press reporting, but I was like, you got to be kidding me. I mean, again, free country, you can do whatever the hell you want, but if you're not going to help the Pentagon, please don't go help the Communist Party of China with their AI research.
I did not agree with the Google decisions on Maven, et cetera. As you know, I worked as a government employee working for the DoD for 5 years using the DIB, so my personal view is clear. I also funded and have continued to work with a large number of startups in the areas that we're interested in who are really, really committed to working with the DoD. So I can tell you that the Google experience you had, it was probably an aberration compared to the industry as a whole.
And Mr. Chairman, if I may, just very quickly, since this is such a distinguished panel, sorry to my colleagues, but I know you've been getting a lot of questions on China. Just very quickly, to be respectful here, I'm over my time. Comparative advantages that we have versus what they have, particularly in this tech sector. I mean, I'll give you, I think the fact that we're an energy superpower right now, producing more oil, gas, and renewables than any country on the planet. China would love to be in that driver's seat. Unfortunately, we have an administration right now that wants to diminish that, which I find ridiculous and crazy. But where do you think the comparative advantages are, particularly in AI? I read that part of their advantage is just their massive population, that in some ways their own population is guinea pigs that helps them advance in AI. Where are our comparative advantages and vice versa theirs?
So the Chinese are well ahead in areas like face recognition because of what they do to surveil their citizens.
So that is the idea of guinea pigs and billions of people that they can just test this on.
Their technology is generations ahead of what is possible in the West, and you can understand why. Their technology is extremely far ahead in electronic commerce and in mobile payments. And most recently, they've announced the development of a central bank digital yuan, their currency, to actually, and they obviously have, from their perspective, internal security benefits from watching where all the money goes. These are all things that the United States would not do. So those are two where there's no question that they have an advantage. There are people who believe that because they have essentially no privacy rights in the terms that we think of it, that they'll be able to aggregate very large databases, in particular in healthcare, and that will allow for them to discover new things and so forth. We need to address these, and again, without compromising our core American values.
I would just say very briefly, we often talk about research and development, but especially for something like AI, we should talk about research, development, and deployment. In other words, broad adoption and use, especially when you think about the positive feedback cycle that is created when technology is deployed. It creates more data. That data then leads to further improvement. I think China is doing a better job right now than we are in deployment. Part of it is it's government-led in many ways. Part of it is there are uses where we quite rightly say no. Part of it is the entrepreneurialism we're seeing in many parts of the Chinese economy. So I think for the United States, we have to think about how we foster faster deployment. And I think in the government, for the DoD, how the DoD, for example, can foster faster deployment. Now, at the same time, the American comparative advantages in other respects remain considerable. Our universities, our commercial technology sector. And I think the principles, one thing we haven't noted that I think is very important in the world today is the fact that the DoD last year adopted ethical principles to guide the use of artificial intelligence by the military. And I think the more we can encourage our allies to adopt these principles, the more we separate ourselves in a way that will benefit us in numerous respects.
Great. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.